Thanks for having me here, bro.
Yeah, I'm excited. I love the logo. This is like all coming together. So
Step by step.
Exactly. Yeah. So explain, Lucas. You are. What are all of your ethnicities and like where have you lived and what like allegiance do you have like country wise? There's so many to count. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm Lucas Santos. I am a Brazilian citizen.
Okay.
But that's because my parents are Brazilian. I was born in Mozambique, Africa. Grew up in South Africa. Moved to the States when I was 19. And now I live in Northwest Arkansas.
Wow. So did you ever live in Brazil?
I lived in Brazil when I was really small.
Okay.
Yeah, but my whole family's there, so I visited every single time. That's like family vacation was always in Brazil.
Okay, yeah. And what about Malawi?
Malawi, I lived in Malawi I lived like 5 years in Malawi. And then the most of my life I spent between Mozambique and South Africa. So high school years was all in South Africa. Yeah.
Wow. That's I don't think I've ever met anyone from Mozambique.
Dude.
I mean I know it's a couple of South Africans, but Mozambique no.
It's rare, but I think we're on the come up. It's a really small country. It's not that big of a country. It's not as small as Malawi, but I think Mozambique is on the come up.
Yeah. So to just talk about just to have a war theme, you know, you mentioned the Mozambique Civil War, and I like to think I know a good bit about wars and history and stuff, but I have no idea about the Mozambique Civil War. So give a rundown of that. If we want to keep talking about that, we can. But when was that started? What was the reason? Just from the beginning.
Yeah. So Mozambique was a colony from Portugal. So it's a Portuguese colony that was right next to South Africa. So a lot of the trade that happened from Europe went to India, South Africa, South America, and then back to like Portugal, right? Like when we look at trades and everything that happens, there wasn't like a clear cut, oh, I'm just going to go to Portugal and go straight. Like they actually had to follow like how the waters and everything operated. And so Mozambique was actually like one of the biggest ports that Portugal ever had because it was bringing all the spices and stuff from India and all the tea and stuff from India, right? And they would store it in Mozambique, and from there trade and do all of that from Mozambique to South America, where they'd get the sugar cane and stuff like that from Brazil, and from there go back to Portugal. So Mozambique is a colony, but there came a point where, you know, everybody was taking their countries back, and Mozambique decided we're going to do the same. It was the last this was like one of the last standing colonies that ever existed. And man, when that happened, there was almost like a coup that happened, and the dominating party is still today the same party that we know that runs Mozambique. It's called Frelimo. So Frelimo comes two very strong parties, Frelimo and Renamo. It's two dominating parties. Think about like your Republicans and your Democrats today. It's but so the two dominating parties help overthrow the Portuguese colonialism. When that happens, the dominating party, Frelimo, decides, okay, we're going to be in charge of the country. We're going to be a democracy. This is what it looks like. And, you know, people didn't agree with that. And so they began the civil war in Mozambique around 1985. Because apartheid was still happening at the time. And so there was a lot of ANC, which is the South African party, right? They got a lot of support from Frelimo, and it was all that kind of stuff. We got AK-47s in our flag because we got communist support to fight, and so it was crazy. But it went from about 1985 until 1991.
Wow.
Yeah, and man, country was divided. Renamo, so you look at it as north and south, right?
Okay.
South is where all the ports are. South is where like all the infrastructure is and everything like that. And so whoever controls the South controls the country, almost.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And Frelimo was in the south, the Renamo was in the north, all the mountains and stuff like that. So they began fighting, and it was crazy because my parents went there to help with refugees of the war. And so, yeah, that's a bit of the Mozambican Civil War.
Wow. Who controlled the South? Was it always changing hands?
It wasn't. It was always the dominant party. It's still there. Like, and that's the
Okay.
crazy thing. It's still
Was
there.
it communist or the
It's very
Democrats?
communist.
Okay,
They
yeah.
got a lot of support from Russia, like as far as weapons and stuff were concerned. And so, yeah, they're there. It's called Frelimo.
Frelimo. Wow.
Yeah.
And is there still a Democratic presence there who's trying to?
There is. Like they vote, they have elections
Yeah.
and all of that, but no other party wins outside of
Yeah.
Frelimo.
Frelimo, man. So it's kind of, they're still dealing with it today.
I mean, it's people in the country say this, like, for you to get things to happen, you kind of need both, because Frelimo won't do anything until there's an uprising, and Renamo starts bombing somebody, and it's like, oh, okay, like, what's the peace treaty? Oh, we need new roads. Okay, we're gonna get new roads, and
Yeah.
it kind of feels that way. Like, if somebody isn't making noise, then nothing happens.
That makes sense. And so just for something to get roads or get food or like a new school, there has to be some civil strife.
Yeah, it's always been like, I'll call home and somebody is getting worked up over something, so that yeah.
Like take a bus hostage. We want a new road, That's like,
Dude,
bro, just
this is literally one bridge that connects the south
Oh.
and the north, and it's always getting bombed somehow.
wow.
It's wild. Yeah.
That's crazy. The whole African political and like just how they operate. I had the chance to go last summer to Kenya for a month, and they talked a lot about the Kenyan election in I think 2009, and it was a guy named Uhuru Kenyatta. He was his grandfather I think was the first president named Jomo Kenyatta, but they got elected, and it was such controversy that they were accused of inciting like a mass riot, and 1,000 people were killed in like this riot, and I think in and around Nairobi, and they were sent to the Hague, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and they were actually like convicted of it.
Yep.
And Uhuru was still president, and he was president until 2022, and his vice president at the time of that election switched factions and actually is the president now. His name is what is his name? William Ruto. He's the president of Kenya. But dude, like however crazy the Democrat Republicans is here, I mean, you look at the January 6th, that's pretty much the extent of the like physical.
It's still very civil.
Yeah. And there was, I think like there was, I don't know if it was 1 or 4, but like fatalities in the whole January 6th thing, which is like a terrible thing in itself. But like 1,000 people dead in a riot from an election.
Yeah,
It's like,
and I have my thoughts on that. You want to hear it?
On what?
On just Africa and and politics.
That's
right.
That's what I'm coming for.
So I think it's politics in itself is a very Western construct. And so when you try to apply it to a place where tribalism was very evident, right? Kingdoms, tribes, and stuff like that existed. It becomes very blurred because people still operate off of tribalism in Africa till this day, right? Our cultural values are very still much that of a tribe, and it's your village, it's your people, and we're cordial with others. But what tribalism is power, and there, for you to have great politics and great, like a great democracy, you need to be able to just navigate how you handle power. And when you try apply that and a political or democratic construct to a very tribal place, it doesn't work that well.
Yeah.
We're way past where we used to be, and thanks to education, right? And people growing up, moving out, learning, and coming back and leading well. However, like the people that are still there and still in power are very much tribal in a sense, and so it's really hard to get advanced in something that you're still fighting like old mindsets for.
Yeah.
Right. And younger generations will say that. Like if you look at South Africa, like people want change. The younger generation want change. And eventually we're going to get to a place where we will have change. But till then, like ANC is still the political power right there, right? It was Mandela's party. And so there's history with that. But sometimes you just need change. And when it comes to to African continents and African countries, there's still a lot of tribalism, and tribalism doesn't invite that much change. And so it's very weird. You take a construct and you try to apply it in a place. And that's what happened, right? It was, if you look at it, it was initially forced upon us. And we've kind of had to like adapt, but it's still very hard to, one day you do something one way and immediately you have to change.
Yeah.
It's tough, but I mean, it's taken years and it's getting better. There's amazing scholars, there's amazing leaders coming out of Africa for these nations. But it just takes time. So that's kind of my thoughts on like politics and how it plays a part in Africa.
You look at I think it was in Brussels. It was the carving up of Africa in the late 1800s. In the early 1900s, you had the whole colonization efforts from Europe. You had France pretty much take all of Western Africa, the northwestern Africa, and then England took its pockets everywhere. Portugal took things, and like all of Europe, pretty much. Well, they colonized Africa, not like 100 years ago,
Yeah.
And you look at themes, and you look at generations, and there's kids alive who were born in 1923, if that's 100 years ago, they're obviously elders now, but they're still alive from back then. And so we're not even that generation removed from them breathing on the soil there. And I just think it's a strange thing is however much or however better you think a system is, democracy, like it works so well in the West, in Northwestern Europe, in the United States, Canada. And it's not been a easy cut and paste formula whatsoever. And like the Africans are still the Africans, and they're very much different from the Europeans and the North Americans, and they have their tribalism. I only have a brief understanding just by seeing it, and I think that's a lot of the reason why there's such problems with translation. And you have the liberty to go in examples and the most specific instances you have, just anything on your head. And go ahead.
I mean, tribalism it almost sounds like a bad word, but it's not. It's a way of life, right? It's for a lot of people, and it's in our culture. It's how we do family. How we do family in Africa is so much different than how we do family in the States, right? It's who we are as a people, how we invite our neighbors, and
what are some examples
how
of that?
friendly we are. Like, if we were living in Africa, I think block parties would be every day.
Yeah.
And it is, right? We build homes behind our homes for our elders, right? We buy a plot of land and we grow our food, and it's all of this. and it plays a big part. Everybody plays their part for a reason, right? There's this very clear social roles. There's very clear gender roles, and so with that, if you look at a way of life and a lifestyle like that, it's very different than the West, and it's easier to adapt to the West because the West believes a lot in equality, right? And we do in Africa as well. We call it Ubuntu, right? It's placing that inherent value in a person, and however, we still, even though we have Ubuntu, even though we place that value in a person, we still know, man, this is my role, right? This is and when you see that, like, if someone comes into my home, I don't expect my wife to protect the home. I protect it.
Yeah.
Right. And if you take that mindset and you put it to politics and everything, and you'll see that, man, it feels a lot like people are coming into our home and who's going to protect it. And sometimes survival is the best, and we submit to certain things, but it's like inside of us there's still this thing that doesn't allow it to click. And I think that's a lot of African nations, man. Democracy, politics, as much books as we read, right, and as much as studied as we are, there's still this place inside of us. It's like, man, my role, if it were to be challenged, I step up, right? And so there's almost this animosity to it, which isn't a bad thing. It's just how we operate, and we know, and it subconsciously plays a part in a lot of the things that we do. And man, yeah, I would say that even like our cultural values play a big part in that. Yeah, and there's a couple instances where I think about it, and that's what I wanted to like talk a lot about because I have more knowledge. Is the Anglo-Zulu War and the Anglo-Boer War, right? When was United States like separated from Britain?
England?
Yeah.
So in 1776, July 4th, that's when they declared independence.
Yeah.
And following that was the Revolutionary War. And then in 1783 was when the first Constitution was ratified and drafted. And that was the beginning of the United States. But 1776 was the separation, at least the United States declaring we don't want to be attached. England stuck around saying we were attached for 7 more years. But ultimately after that.
And so I think that a lot of this starts with that point.
Really?
I think England goes into a place where now they're afraid to lose power. And so fast forward to about 1874, that's when they bring in Canada, right? And England brings in Canada, and there's this guy, I keep forgetting his name. I think it's like Lord Kavanaugh or something like that.
An English guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he's like, wow, if we did that to Canada, I think every single place that we have British presence in, we can just make ours and make it a part of like almost like a constitution of the English people. And one of those places is South Africa, right? And so in 1876, he sends one of his generals to South Africa, and they send like a cordial letter to the Zulu kingdoms, and they say, hey, we're taking over this space, and you guys are going to be part of who we are.
Yeah.
And the Zulu kings come together, and they're like, no. And so 1879, they begin launching the first attacks on South Africa, right, against this. They bring in all these military power. They brought about 15 to 16,000 soldiers.
Wow.
And they were like, hey, we're coming to take our place. And as they're moving in, the Anglo-Zulu War begins, where all the Zulu kings come together and they fight them off. And here's the cool thing: the first invasion, the Zulus actually win. Right?
How'd that happen? They just surprise them.
Yeah, and so there's this mountain is called Isandwalo. It's there till today, and for you to kind of like get over, there's a river and there's a mountain, and you have to go around to kind of get to the other side. And the British post at the moment was right on the side of the river, and so there's a kind of big river separating it. And so they move past the river. They're starting to set up camp, and man, they get one of the biggest surprises that they ever seen. And here's a cool thing: there was about 38 to like 45,000 Zulu fighters, right? No weapons. It was all just spears and bows and things like that. But, you know, they gave them a run for their money. They retreat. And then several days after, the Zulu people kind of, like, they get kind of prideful, right? The Zulu kings are like, well, if we beat them once, we can probably, like, be done with them. And they go in for an attack, and the saying, defense wins championships becomes a reality now, right? Because the British are now on the defense, and with that, man, they bring so much fatality to the Zulu kingdom that, you know, as they were waiting for more troops to arrive, they're just like, in the span of 5 days, just basically defending. And the Zulu are just attacking without getting tired, right? They're just going. They're just going. They're just going. And the British are just in their little fort, and just, you know, killing people. Like, there was thousands. I think it was like 16,000, like the fatality for the Zulu people. And then help comes, right? More troops come in from the British army. And man, they now go on the offensive, and they win, and they end up taking that place. And they kind of put a treaty out there with the Zulu people, saying, "Hey, we will protect you as long as you remain within this treaty," and kind of colonize them in that moment. And one of those things were, "You'll help us overthrow the Boer." So the Boer are the Dutch that came to South Africa, and they lived towards like Cape Town side. And so when the English, so Cape Town is the utmost south point of South Africa. I don't know if you're familiar with South Africa.
Yeah, that's where the Cape of Good Hope is.
Yeah. And so Cape Town is the utmost part of South Africa. It was first belonged to the Portuguese, then the Dutch came and took it over. Then the English came and took it over from the Dutch. But when the English came and took it over from the Dutch kind of like moved up. They went north. So they stayed in areas like from like Bloemfontein all the way to Zimbabwe, which at the time was called Rhodesia, right?
Yeah, Rhodesia.
And so they occupied that, and they decided, hey, we're going to make the South African Republic out of, so they made they made treaties with different tribes at the time and everything, and they made the South African Republic. And one of the goals was for Britain to overthrow the Boer. And so that was their first campaign, you can say, to take that power. You know, they did it in Canada. They kind of overthrew the French in Canada. They made Canada part of the British. And now they're trying to do the same in South Africa. So they defeat the Zulu. They get the Zulu on board on their team.
Wow.
And they say, hey, we're going to go for the Dutch. And then in about 1897 to like 1905 is the Anglo-Boer War, which is the British versus the Boer. And I don't think there was any victors. If there were victors, I think the Boer won, because the Boer had power from there up to like when Mandela stepped in the picture. And
really,
yeah.
So I always thought South Africa was an English outpost, like just as much as Australia and Canada was. Was it how much of it was it like under English control versus Voodoo and Zulu and everyone else?
Um, I don't think the English ever had full control of South Africa.
Really? Wow. So just
Yeah.
parts of it?
Parts of it, and I think they were always fighting for some more, and they could never get it. They never fully got it until, because again the Boer were in power until, man,
Like the 90s, right, with Mandela?
yeah, like up to yeah, literally, like, because Mandela's like was about after World War II and into the Cold War and into 1994, South Africa becomes a democracy. And so think about that. Like, I don't think, and in that, I don't think the British ever had power.
And they'll probably never have power there again. Guaranteed they won't.
Yeah, probably not.
I didn't know that. Wow. I guess you look at the language Afrikaans, and that's a mix of Dutch. And is that English as well?
No, Afrikaans is a, man. How's a good way to put it? In Mozambique and in Brazil, we have what's called Creole.
Yeah, Creole, like the Haitians and like
yeah,
a mix.
Yeah, it's a mix, and I think like I always thought of Afrikaans like a Creole version of Dutch. It's their own language that they adapted while they were in South Africa. There's a lot of similarities and there's some differences.
So just being separated from the Netherlands, they kind of had the same thing, but over time, the separation from the source had changes.
Yeah.
Interesting. So yeah, I guess if there's Afrikaans in South Africa, and there's English accents, or like a South African accent, like there must have just been a conglomeration of people.
Yeah, that's why it's called the Rainbow Nation.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
South Africa is called the Rainbow Nation because there's so many tribes that existed in it, more than the average country. Like you'd go to like Mozambique, and these major tribes, right? And so you'll get like 4 major tribes that made the whole country, right? And they were all like everybody's like distant relatives. But South Africa has 11 official languages.
Wow.
And 9 of them are from tribes, are now languages that when they made the democracy, they said, okay, we're not going to call this a dialect. Like this is going to be an official language to show that, man, we're all coming together and becoming South Africa.
Wow.
Yeah. And so there's 9 different, like, it's like Zulu, Tswana, Xhosa, man, and there's so much. Those are the top 3 that I know.
Yeah.
But this petty, like, man, there's yeah, and then Afrikaans and English. So they have 11 official languages.
Jeez.
I think it's the only country that has that many.
Wow. 11? I had no idea.
Yeah.
So what is the demographics between like blacks and then like the European whites and English and even Dutch too? What's the mix today?
I need to look that up, but I think it's probably like 90% black. There's this very small population right now of English too, but mainly like the biggest population outside of blacks right now in South Africa is probably Afrikaans, and then there's Portuguese. There's a lot of Portuguese.
Wow. I've always pictured South Africa as a random outpost of white Europeans in Africa, and I'm seeing that that's not the case.
No,
demographically at least. Wow.
It was a home for a lot of people.
Wow, 11 different languages. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and again, that's why politics and democracy is so hard.
Yeah, because how do you manage? There's no unity almost. There's no common sense of.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And it's, the tribalistic factor is still there.
Yeah, totally. And like, you have all these ancient territories, right? Like, if you cross this line, you're in. I know in Kenya, it was like the Maasai tribe was the warriors, and it's like they're very hostile over their territory.
Yeah, that's the Zulu.
The Zulu. Okay.
Yeah, and they're proud.
Wow.
Yeah, man. It's a really fascinating culture.
Yeah. So how do you bring like democracy to those people who are like proud warriors? I imagine it's not going to be easy.
It's not. And even till this day, the reason why ANC is still in power, it has a lot to do with the Zulu. And so, yeah, they're strong, strong-charactered, strong-headed.
Really?
And man, like, they were the warriors, right? If you look at the history of African warriors, Shaka Zulu is the first one that will pop up to your search, and if you look at it, it's because that's who they were. They were known for that.
Yeah.
And KwaZulu-Natal is a province. It's one of the biggest provinces in South Africa, and you know, it's the kings are still there. Every tribe is still there. They just live in cities now.
Yeah, like skyscrapers.
But they're still very clear. How do I say it? Tribal structures, and how they vote, and who runs what, and what decisions are made. It's almost like you need to get approval from the tribal leaders to do a certain thing. Yeah, man, there's still that.
But they just happen to live in concrete buildings and drive cars.
Yeah.
Rather than like live how you picture like 3,000 years ago in a hut or something.
Yeah. But their weddings are still traditional.
Wow.
So it's wild. They'll slaughter a cow right in front of their house, and throw parties, and yeah.
It's like a sense of the old world is still around.
Oh, very much so.
And yeah, you just don't see that in the United States.
No.
And I mean, not even anywhere else, like around the United States. Like, I don't know if Mexico, Canada, or even like South America does anything like that. I'm sure they do in like Peru or any like Andes countries.
Yeah, and I think that's intentional because of how the country is ran. I think you need that to be able to keep the peace. Kind of give them their space and let them be in order to keep the peace.
Yeah.
But there's always strife in South Africa. If you look at it, if you look on the news, there's always somebody shooting somebody up. One political leader saying something crazy, out of pocket, and yeah, man.
And so, going to apartheid, I always pictured it as like the slavery was in the United States, like the white people enslaving the Africans. And so, what was apartheid then? Apartheid
was, I mean, you could look at it like that, but it was more than that. It was just like how the USA had Jim Crow laws. South Africa had similar laws.
And who did they discriminate against, like Zulus?
Yeah, they discriminate. Like, it was, I think they even discriminate, like, because the Boer were so small in their numbers, but they had the power. And so they created systems and structures that would make it very hard for people to be able to get to their level, because they never wanted to give up power. And so what apartheid was a group of it honestly started with the youth, right?
Really?
One of the very first signs and markings of apartheid is Youth Day in South Africa, right? It's June 16. And, it's a bunch of kids that decided, man, why am I going to school to learn a language that I don't need? It's not my language. It's not my home language. It's not the business language, which was English, right? Why am I forced to learn Afrikaans? And they decided that, they're going to go on a strike. And so this group of high schoolers, they leave their school. They get up during class and they walk out. And in that, man, a riot begins, so much so that the army is called in. And, the army is trying to control everything. Somebody said the guy was nervous, right? Or, the story goes that they threw rocks, and this guy, out of his nervousness and a fear for his life, fires a shot. And if there's a line of defense almost, and somebody fires a shot, everybody in that line is going to fire a shot.
Yeah.
And so a kid ends up getting killed. And so there's this famous image, right? It's a young man holding this kid dead in his arms, running away with like just smoke grenades going off and things like that. And I think that was the first time the world saw too, like, man, what is happening in South Africa? And the political leaders kind of adopted a very Black Panther type of mindset and said, hey, we're going to fight back. And so Mandela and his party were the peace guys, right? They didn't retaliate. They had passive, just not riots, but like they would do like sit-ins. They believed a lot of what Mahatma Gandhi would say.
Yeah, Gandhi and MLK did a lot of stuff.
Yeah, just like peaceful protest and things like that. But then on the other side, there's a guy called Steve Biko, which is almost like Malcolm X here, right? Or not even Malcolm X. Who are the Black Panther guys?
Like in the movie or what?
Yeah, the actual people, the actual leaders. I keep forgetting their names.
Oh, I don't know who they are.
But Steve Biko was that guy, and
Like a militant.
very militant.
Yeah, aggressive. Okay.
Very like, hey, and so he would go down to just business squares in Johannesburg and set off bombs, right? And just let people know, like, hey, you're not going to push us. We're going to fight back. And so that goes on for a long time. They kill Steve Biko, they arrest Mandela, and kind of people think like, man, this is over. But at that time, the world kind of picked up on what was happening.
Yeah.
And so we had ammunition to fight because of media and the power of news and everything like that. So, yeah.
Dang. Was apartheid, when was like the Republic of South Africa? That was in the early 1900s from the Bood, though.
Yes.
And it was always like that until 94?
But now it's the Democratic Republic of South Africa.
Okay.
So the Republic of South Africa was late 1800s, early 1900s. In 1994, it becomes Democratic Republic of South Africa, and they host the first elections in the history of the country.
Wow.
And, Mandela gets voted in.
Yes, he wins.
And he wins, and they start what was the reconciliation trials. And, man, it was something that was set in place to help heal, And so they put perpetrators against the people they perpetrated.
Yeah.
And they would get to judge them. And so there was a lot of healing that happened. There was a lot of forgiveness that happened. There's stories, man. There's cases upon cases upon cases where people were like, yeah, I killed your husband. And a wife had to forgive or decide what she was going to do. It was kind of like reconciliation. And so, yeah, that was after 1994 all the way to like 1996. They did those reconciliation trials. Yeah.
And that
It's
wasn't
very
even,
recent.
that wasn't even 30 years ago.
No,
And so those effects are absolutely still around.
100%.
Wow.
A lot of prejudice is still there,
Yeah.
rooted in people, and so like you see it as far as the South African people are concerned. You just see it. There's events that have happened called xenophobic attacks that was from South Africans to other people groups, and yeah, man, it's still very evident because it's so close. It's again like barely 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a lot more than I even knew existed. Wow. South Africa had nukes at one point, and they gave them up. Do you know anything about that?
I do, and I mean I think South Africa has or had. That's a good statement, but South Africa had one of the greatest hidden army powers in the world. They were very, very meticulous with who was in the army. They did a lot of missions that people don't even know South Africans were at. That I literally met some guy in Orlando, and he was telling me like, man, the South Africans are crazy, and his friend was like, you don't know nothing about South Africa, and this guy is like, oh buddy, I know. I was with some crazy South African guys in Angola, right? And we're like, what? The U.S. was in Angola? And he's like, I can't talk about it.
Jeez. Wow.
And I was like, dang. But it's true. Like there was a lot going on between the Cold War, and if Africa had to do with anything, South Africa was probably involved in a lot of that.
Wow.
So they did. They were part of very. They were a big part in the Allies, even during World War II.
Wow.
Up in Angola, up in Egypt, like there was a lot of South African army presence that you probably never hear.
No. Is it a lot of special forces, secret missions?
Yes.
That's interesting. What do you know about it? I mean, don't tell me you were a special operator.
No,
You can't say anything. Okay.
No, I don't know much about it, but I do know that there was involvement from like firsthand sources.
Okay.
And pictures and all that. Man, like the militant world, like the military world, is kind of crazy if you think about it. Like and relationships play a huge part in it. And if you even look, like the U.S. kind of looked down on Mandela and the opposition party because they were getting aided from, they were like guerrillas, right? They were like the bad people. And South Africa had ties with the U.S. and the Allies during World War II. And so there was, it was like what was shown in the States, man, was hardly ever shown.
Yeah.
What the States hardly ever showed what was actually happening in South Africa, right? And so, yeah, there was a lot of presence in a lot of wars from South Africa.
Do you think it's because they had such a big group of people that they had, like the Dutch people had a reason to do something? If, let's say, in Zimbabwe, like north, there was an issue that affected the Dutch, or in the English, or any other African group.
Yes, and I think a lot of what it was is because those groups had to survive so long on their own that they just created brilliant war minds, right? And because they were so fresh from just different battles, like if you look in the span of 50, 60 years, they went from the Anglo-Zulu War, Anglo-Boer War, and then World War One, right? And then World War Two, all within the span of literally like
40 years.
Like 40 years, dude. And so I think the world saw that and valued what they had to offer.
Wow.
It was this small yet powerful military mind.
You know, whatever the country says, the mass population, I think that the military leaders, the top of the top, I think people always see the value in valuable people.
Yeah.
No matter what the political leaders say. You know, I recently read the biography about the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he was in the IDF's Israel Defense Forces. They're like #1 unit and stuff, and they were doing stuff all over the world. His brother was actually killed in a terrorist. They kidnapped a plane and flew it to Uganda, Kampala, where Idi Amin was, and so I think it was Lebanese or Syrian or Palestinian people who were just trying to kill Israelis just to make a political statement, and they found refuge in Idi Amin and his communist regime, and so they flew it there, and then the Israelis, dude, they flew over the Red Sea and then through Kenya, and then landed there, and then carried out a raid and killed actually killed a couple of Ugandans. They killed all the terrorists, and Netanyahu's brother was killed. He was the only Israeli killed in that raid. But it's like, dude, they went to the middle of Africa.
Yeah.
This Israeli team, and just took back the plane. And I think the Americans, however good the Americans are, look at the Navy SEALs, and then the Navy SEALs, I know, appreciate the Mossad, what the Israeli Defense Force does.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they appreciate the South Africans. If they're good enough, they're not gonna care about what the popular opinion is.
Yeah.
They're gonna these are our guys. I don't even know what they did in Angola, but however good they were, it's this is what we're gonna get from them.
Yeah.
So I think the special military world sees that.
And dude, I like how you said it, because they do. There's so much, and it's if you're not part of it, you'll probably never know.
You won't know. Yep. And it's just that's just special operations.
Yeah, and because there is that factor, there is leaders that are opposing the U.S. power that exists in Africa that the U.S. can't necessarily get to, right? And so they need these relationships, and they need to be able to be trusted. That's why I don't think you hear a lot about it. Wow. They're really good. If you don't, I think that's the thing. If you don't hear about them, it's because they're really good.
There's the United States #1 special group. It's called Delta Force, and they actually change names all the time. But they pick the best of the best from the SEALs and the Green Berets, and you don't know, no one knows anything about them. If you look them up, everything is classified.
Yeah, and
it's precisely that way on purpose. And their main logo is do all of the work and let someone else take the credit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's my uncle. He was in the Army for 6 years, and he was like, dude, they might even been the ones who killed bin Laden, and let the SEALs take credit for it. And it's that's just how they do things. And so who knows what Delta Force is doing? They're they could be doing something right now, and I'll never even know about it. And I guarantee you they've done work in Africa with the South Africans at one point in time.
Yeah.
And it's just something that they'll just know, and no one else.
Yeah, dude.
Not more than 100 people on Earth will probably ever even know.
No.
And that's just how. It's just in the background, keeping things running.
And they do. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Because there's moments where people just disappear out of the picture, especially in Africa, man.
Really.
It's crazy. In Africa, somebody will be barking, wow, 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 making noise, and then all of a sudden they're gone, and it's
yep.
whatever happened to that guy? You know,
Dude, they got him.
they got him.
That's crazy. That kind of stuff's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Wow. But what was his name? Steven, the guy, the Mandela's counterpart.
Steve Biko.
Biko. Do you think he got taken out by some special team?
Yeah. That's what I think.
Rip Steve Biko.
That's what I think.
Wow.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I love the whole like covert military world.
It's definitely. I prefer like old school stuff.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you everybody that's there. It's kings and they're legions of people and battalions and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And one versus the other. But it's becoming more secretive every time.
Oh yeah. Well, you look at what's happening in Ukraine and drones, and I spoke to a guy. It was Tuesday night up at Heart and Soul at an event we were both at, and he was talking to a colonel about drone warfare, and he's like, yeah, dude, if you join, the deployments will be 9 months, but it'll be in Little Rock, Arkansas, and you'll be flying drones across the world. And you look at the capability of drones you can see footage just having a bomb on a drone, as simple as that, and just flying them into the enemy. And it's like that absolutely has changed the game.
Yeah.
One, a ground soldier has to worry about every single thing that they have to worry about, which is numerous amounts. But now it's never even being able to be spotted from a camera, however high up. And then like you can't prepare from that, like unless you have guys.
I gotta introduce you to a guy. I don't think I can say his name.
No way. I see you into that. Drone stuff. But, wow.
Yeah. And like this footage and stuff, it's wild.
Yeah, man, it's unbelievable. And you look at, more advanced stuff. The planes today, they can put a missile from like 40,000 feet up from just a fighter jet. I don't know. I don't think they fly that high, but they can take from a mile, 2 miles up, and put it in the second story window where they precisely want it to go. And from across the world, some 19-year-old Air Force kid on a computer, it's like the pace and the ability just to take things out is crazy now.
Yeah.
And so gone are the days where it's like the Romans fighting, where it's.
How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
I think about their battles all the time, where it's like 1,500 guys and 1,500, and then they just run at each other, and it's brutal.
Yeah.
But dude, if that happened today, they would get.
Do you think we'll ever come back to a time where that's gonna be the reality?
Somehow
when we just blow it all up.
Somehow it'll bring back Albert Einstein said after Oppenheimer actually created the nuke, he said sometime after, I don't know what weapons World War III will be fought with, but I know World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yeah.
So he knew that weapons are just going to get so crazy, and if we all go up in a nuclear war, then what's going to be left is.
Oh, now they got AI soldiers.
The robots and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, that stuff's crazy too. But what's left after that is going to be like people from 10,000 years ago. Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows, bro? That's wild.
It is crazy stuff. How much time we have?
Maybe till then, the Lord Jesus will be back.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what's crazy. I think that about this frequently, actually, as a terrorist drone attack. And and it wouldn't be that hard to pull off from a well-funded terrorist group. Like, get 100 drones that you can buy for like $500, like the DJI drones, and they can just program them to fly in various places simultaneously with a payload on them. And that's just something that I think it's unfortunately a reality check or wake up call is going to have to happen.
Yeah.
And like, that's just horrible. But like, how do you like the FAA, that monitors the air? It's like, there's going to have to be something, because.
Yeah. And I think there is protocol in place.
Yeah.
Because there would have been, if there wasn't, bro, there's probably somebody trying to figure out ways to attack the U.S.
Yeah.
And if we don't see it, it's because, man, they're on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, I know you've seen the videos of Israel with their curtain, right? Like
their Iron Dome.
Their Iron Dome.
Yeah.
Like, we probably have something like that, but we're so 3 steps ahead that people, like, we don't even get to see that, right? Mm-hmm. Israel has all this stuff on display, right? And I think we have a lot more.
Absolutely.
But we're so far in advance of that. That's like, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
Because if not, bro, I don't know. Like, stuff would have been blowing up everywhere else.
Yeah. There's the movie Tenet. You know, Tenet movie with Christopher Nolan a couple years back. The whole like tagline at the end is like, no one ever cared about the bomb that didn't go off. And I think it's true.
Yeah.
It's like there's heroes that are saving the day, and it's like we don't ever hear about it because it didn't happen, you know. And it's like
but that's the kind of stuff I think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's totally necessary.
Yeah.
And like I guarantee again that some special forces, like, there could be a terrorist guy, but the South Africans got to him and took him out, you know.
Yeah.
Or the Americans or the CIA. And of course, there has to be with so many of these people. But a fear of, like, a picture of mine is, imagine 50 drones with like a grenade on them or something, like or a tiny block of explosive, and they get pre-programmed just to fly into a house, like a whole neighborhood. Each drone goes to one house and like breaks through the glass, and it's in. And like, that sounds like so futuristic and dystopian and sci-fi, but how easy would that be? All you need to do is have like an AI path to have a drone on a flight path, and that's extremely doable. And all it takes is someone to get their hands on that, and then you have a completely autonomous, like sorted attack. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, it is crazy, but
and then AI robots too, like unleashing one of those.
Have you seen like how many? Because you were talking about like being well funded, right? You need to be well funded to do that. Have you seen how many like big cryptocurrency dudes are just not waking up? Have you seen that lately?
No, I haven't.
Bro, in a span of like 3-4 weeks, or like a month or two, dude, I've just been seeing news like so and so, this portfolio in cryptocurrency woke up dead.
Wow.
I'm like, he woke up dead. Okay.
He woke up in a basement upside down.
He took his life.
Dead.
Okay. But a lot of that, man, I think is these dudes were probably doing something sketch.
Mm-hmm.
And they just had to go.
Sometimes that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
I
gotta introduce you to a guy, bro.
I would like to meet this guy.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's wild.
Is it about drones and stuff?
Yeah.
Wow.
Call him Captain America.
Wow. Well, dude, I think we got our time at 59 minutes. So thanks for hopping on, man. This has been cool.
I hope you got to learn some of South Africa.
Man. I did not know any of that prior. I knew about Mandela and apartheid, but not the actual people groups involved. So
yeah, and what led to it.
Yeah, that's been cool. Well, appreciate it, man. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Yeah. All righty.
Let's go,
man.